This morning, we are pleased once again to have Pastor David Vasquez, the campus pastor at Luther College, to lead us in a Bible study. I have been touched, moved by his comments and presentations so far. So let's welcome one more time Pastor Vasquez.
Good morning. It's great to be back together in the rain that refreshes the earth. And we pray for that we get just the right amount of rain, not too much for the fields, and just enough so that we can have food yet another week. So it's been great to be in conversation with you as we have reflected together on the ways that mobility is shaping so much of our lives. And we've talked a little bit. I better get my slider here, sorry, keep forgetting this. All the sliding into worship and I forget my slider. So we've been talking about the way that, can I get the slides up? Hallelujah. There we go. Okay, we're down here. The ways that mobility has shaped the image in the biblical text that talks to us and identifies with the fact that we live as people who are sojourners in the earth. So in the biblical text, we've talked about the fact that Deuteronomy invites us to remember that we were foreigners in Egypt. And that's an interesting dynamic, that we are told you were slaves in Egypt, so that we may remember this is our own story. And then we're also told that our future relies on mobility, on being foreigners and recognizing that we are sojourners on the earth, that to be a person of faith means to be a person on the move. And this isn't surprising when we think about the text that we are working with. If you remember the first thing, what was the first thing that the people who followed Jesus were called? The way. The Greek word is hodos, which means the road. So that's who we are. We are the people of the road. We're always a people who are moving towards the fulfillment of God's vision for the world we live in. This is something that's important to us as a people of faith, as important to me as a pastor who has been entrusted, like all of us have, with the good news of Jesus Christ, who claims to be the way, the road. It's also important to me in a very personal way, because migration shapes my family. This is a picture of my family. It's a couple of years old, but I love it. Such a great shot. So my wife, Carla Sumala, so again, some of you know Mary and Aaron Sumala Folker, so this is Carla's sister right there. You can't quite see her face. And then our two kids, Dawit and Meheret, who are now 12 and 8. So I'm originally from Guatemala. Carla's family is Finnish, and our kids are from Ethiopia. So migration is a very personal matter in our home. We joke about the fact that our family, like probably any good Lutheran family, is connected by coffee. You know, coffee is originally from Ethiopia. Some of the best coffee is grown in Guatemala, and Finns drink the most coffee per capita in the world. So there is a design. This is my son yesterday. I got to brag a little, not very Lutheran, but I got to brag quick, okay? So this is my son running yesterday. So yesterday morning, as I was doing a Bible study here, he was running the 800-meter, placed first in the state Hershey competition yesterday. So I had to brag about it. It's very fun. So migration is something that is both in our lives and in our future. It is certainly in my children's future. My daughter has already lived or spent time in 4 different continents in her life, and she's 8. The level of mobility that she has in her life, that many of us have experienced, perhaps not necessarily going across national borders, but even as we noticed yesterday by a show of hands, the level of mobility we live with is huge, and it will continue to be that way. We talked about yesterday the fact that mobility can sometimes have a difficult consequence, that there is migration, that we are leaving a place behind when we go. And so sometimes one of the challenges for rural America is that we are seeing a major migration happening from rural areas into urban centers. You can see kind of like, as it gets darker blue, you can see where people are moving, right? And this we know in lots of different ways in the state, but it's a reality throughout the Midwest and around the country, where rural communities are really struggling in some ways to retain their population. But in other ways, they are also seeing new influx of people. This is a challenge that's facing all of the Midwest and particularly all of Minnesota as well. This is what they call the demographic squeeze. So even though there's been some migration internally, there's also a squeeze happening. And in this graph, what you see is the red graph is the increase in the number of people who are in a dependent category. So folks who are either retired or on the age 17. And the blue line is the number of people who are of working age, and that is dropping. And so that's what's creating a demographic squeeze that many times we are seeing in the way that our communities are trying to figure out a way forward financially. So we don't have enough labor force in Minnesota, like we don't have enough labor force in all of the Midwest. Now this is hard to understand when we have an unemployment rate, right? Shouldn't we be able to just get all those people into a job? The reality is that when it comes to rural America in particular, the needs for the jobs don't match either the skill set, the interest, or the location of the people who are unemployed. People aren't necessarily going to move to a rural area for all kinds of jobs. So it just depends. That's where we find ourselves. But it's not all difficult news, even though the reality needs to be acknowledged. Just like Joseph had to acknowledge the reality that he lived with, to close the door and talk together about the realities that we are facing. The other side of the slide I didn't show you yesterday. I'm not sure if you can see the numbers because they're a little small, but there is significant growth happening in the population of Minnesota, but almost all of it is happening within minority groups. Particularly in Latino population, the increase in the last census from 2000 to 2010, the Latino population in Minnesota has increased by 75%. Some of you are seeing this in your own neighborhoods. Some of you are seeing it regionally. And perhaps not, if not in your specific towns. The good news for us is that our future is bound in migration. The realities we are facing sometimes that where migration is a loss to many of our communities doesn't have to be the story we live with. The reality is that our future is bound with those who are moving. Because what we are seeing today is a radical rural migration. How many of you live near I-35? I asked this yesterday. All of us do, right? We all live about 100 miles or so from I-35. So if you take I-35, which begins in Laredo and ends in Duluth, and if you go about 100 to 200 miles each way, and you have a swath in the middle of the country, 1/3 of all immigrants coming to the United States are going up that path. We talked at the very beginning in the first Bible study about how people follow trade. This is our trade route through here, is I-35. The New York Times has been doing a series that is on its 28th day today. If you go to the New York Times website, it's called The Way North. And it's a project that is basically this guy is driving his way up I-35 and seeing the impact of migration across that way. They were in Des Moines this morning, so they'll be probably near us here tomorrow or in the next couple of days. Most of these immigrants are from rural communities, and they are interested in living in rural communities because that's who they are. They are rural folks who appreciate the importance of family, of small communities, of good schools, the things that we all value as well. So the question is whether we are going to see this as a threat and as a time of only crisis, or are we capable of seeing the world and seeing this transition and this mobility as people who can move with confidence into a moving world, as people of the way, people of the road. This is something that we need to pay attention to because it's not going away. Do you recognize some of these symbols out here? Any of you affected by any of these symbols in your daily life? So they have one thing in common other than being technology companies. The other thing they have in common is that all of them were started by a foreign-born person, okay, that had come to the United States. This is a reality that shapes not only our rural communities, it shapes all of our lives together. Today, according to a study from the Migration Policy Institute, I'll read this to you, immigrants make up a sizable portion of the U.S. healthcare force. So you know how people say often immigrants burden our schools and our hospitals? Certainly, the influx of immigrants does affect and bring some challenges to communities. But the reality is that in rural communities, without immigrants, you close schools and you close hospitals, okay? We need to have population in order for these things to be sustained. And not only that, the skills that they bring in are across the entire set. It's not only people coming to do work that nobody wants to do. 27% of doctors in the United States are foreign-born. 1 out of 4. And you may know this already from your own experience of your own doctor. I know my kid's doctor was born in Kenya, and I live in Northeast Iowa. As 22% of the people who work in other health support jobs are also foreign-born. 18%, a little bit more of statistics here, 18% of small business owners in the United States today are immigrants, and the number is increasing. Now, only 14% of the population is foreign-born, but 18% of the small business owners. Is that the engine of our economy? I think that's what I hear regularly. And so who's doing this? 18% of it? Foreign-born folks. 30% of the growth in the number of small businesses between 1990 and 2010 are attributed to immigrant owners. Study after study has captured the significance that our future is bound together with immigrants. What Jesus says to the folks who are walking with downcast and with their hearts troubled away from something they are not sure what to make of, because their world has collapsed. Jesus says to them, what things? Take a look around. There is a lot of ways for us to learn what things are happening. Our universities, the University of Minnesota, has conducted a number of studies on the impact of migration right in our neighborhood, right in our communities. We have the opportunity and the ability to learn. In the year 2000, just a couple months here, an estimated 33% of workers in the meatpacking food processing industries in southern Minnesota were Latino. That's 10 years ago. I'm not sure where that percentage is today, but I'm sure it's higher than that. In a 2008 simulation, if all of these folks were to go away, we would lose about 16,000 jobs, about $400 million in productivity. This would have a ripple effect throughout our economy. So the realities we are facing and the challenges of migration, the anxiety that comes with all of this, doesn't have to be what defines the way we engage it, because we are people of faith. Next Friday, I'll be coming back to the Synod area here, down to Worthington, Minnesota, for the premiere of this film, Abuelos y Nietos Juntos, 2 generations together. I want to show you briefly a clip of that video. Worthington has in different ways struggled with the influx of immigrants into their community. But this is one example of the way in which the people of the way can change the way we approach those that are coming to us. We know something about our ability to help people find their way home, to help people feel like they have home, because we are a people that know that with a little bit of water and a word of promise, we can help others find home and feel part of community. This is the treasure that has been entrusted to us, placed in clay jars, yet entrusted and powerful. We have the opportunity to find a way to invite others to find home with us in an increasingly mobile world. So let me take a few minutes that I have left here. I'm probably running a little over with the video thing, so give me a minute here, is that okay? I'll share one more Bible story very quickly with you. So this is a familiar story of the 10 lepers that come to be healed by Jesus. So on the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. Jesus is, as he often is, on the move, and he's on a border town, right? So he's between Samaria and Galilee. We know a little bit about the troubles between Samaria and Galilee from the various stories in the Bible. And Jesus is making his final journey to Jerusalem, okay? Keeping their distance, as they entered the village, 10 lepers approached him. Now, the lepers couldn't live in the city. They had to be outside of it. And they approached Jesus and they say, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priest." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, now, were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well. The increased mobility of our world can sometimes leave us feeling like those lepers who felt that they were outside of whatever was going on in the world, that people were moving away from them. There are things in our life experience that can leave us feeling that way. Broken relationships, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, an economic concern. Now, 9 out of the 10 lepers who encountered Jesus on that border town may have tried to find their way home after they were healed. Notice that Jesus does very little to them. He says, go to the priest and show yourself. That's all he says. So they go, they are likely healed. We're not told that exactly, but they seem to have been. And 9 of them are able to go home to some relatives. Only one of them comes back. The one who comes back to Jesus is the one who has no home to return to. He is a Samaritan, so he cannot go show himself to the priest because Samaritans aren't allowed near the temple or the synagogue because they are outsiders. So this man knows that his lot has to be thrown with a moving target. Jesus is falling literally down to Jerusalem. And he says, I have no place to lay my head. And this one foreigner recognizes that when he has no way to go home, he will make his home in Jesus Christ. For centuries, we have figured out our way around by using triangulation. And you're probably familiar with this. So if you're in a ship out there, you find a lighthouse and one other point, and then you figure out where you're at by creating a little triangle. So you need 2 fixed points to orient yourself, right? That works. Oftentimes, as a people of faith, we have oriented ourselves like those 9 lepers did. Their orientation was to the temple, to the priests, and to the traditions. So when they needed to find their way home, they could return to those. The 10th leper could not go home. He had no fixed points. So he had to tie his future with this foreigner who was going on his way to the cross. The interesting thing is that today, when we use our little GPS devices, the way we find our way home today is very different than what we used to do before. You probably know how a GPS works. Basically, there's a whole bunch of satellites running around the earth, literally falling objects. And your little device tries to connect with 4 of them at the same time. 4 moving objects to figure out where you're at. And it's significantly more accurate. In an increasingly mobile world, people of faith tie themselves to a moving object. No longer to just clearly define set things that are in our past, our buildings, what we have known in our traditions. But do we have the courage to be the place where people can find their way home in Jesus Christ, the moving target, the one who is always on the road, the one who claims to be the way? Amen.